Okay, we're live once again. It is Fantasy Football Forum. I am joined by my wonderful co-host Grant, as usual, on our stream here today. And Grant, it's been several months now. I think we talked after the Super Bowl and your retelling of the live events at the Super Bowl back in February, and there's been a lot that's happened over the last few months. And offseason in the NFL, we've had free agency and the NFL draft go on. And yeah, how's it been going, Grant? What have you been overall thoughts of offseason with the NFL so far?
Um, I don't think it's been the craziest offseason that I've seen in a while, but I mean, definitely some moves, and you saw a lot of teams respect cap space that and kind of make some moves to adjust. Obviously, with the increased cap space, there's a little more flexibility to teams like the Bills or the Saints that were kind of behind the ball on that, but there were moves, and so a lot of players did move around, and Russell Wilson has now a Steeler, right? And that's kind of the big one from our division, and getting that minimum veteran pay, and the Broncos are footing $40 million of dead money that they're going to give them, and so
Yeah.
from the AFC West division, that's the big news. But yeah, between that and the draft, I mean, lots to talk about with fantasy and potential players that could break out.
Yeah, Denver's definitely paying a whole lot more to keep Russell Wilson away and let him go on another team. So I think that's
Yes.
also with the cap elevating the way it was. I think teams are more realizing there's opportunity to move forward from players that they just don't like. And with Denver, whether that was a coaching between Wilson and Sean Payton that didn't like it, or whatever that was, that situation's now moved on. So yeah, I don't. There's a lot of shuffling around with players. Diggs is now not in Buffalo anymore, and we'll kind of get to how they address that need in the draft. He joins the Texans, so that's going to be a very loaded wide receiver room in Texas
Mm-hmm.
for CJ Stroud in his second year. So they're going to definitely be on the rise, and Super Bowl hopefuls in their sights, but of course they'll have to get through Kansas City still, as everybody in the AFC still has to get through Kansas City for hopes for a Super Bowl. Just ask Buffalo about
Yep.
that every year. Just ask
Yep.
Buffalo about that. But thoughts? Okay, so we saw the draft. It happened what now 2 weeks ago. Kind of had
Mm-hmm.
our chance to review it, and what are kind of your thoughts on the draft? Anything that came out of it that was pretty surprising for you?
Um, I think, I mean, from fantasy wise, I think the first top 10 picks, minus the Falcons, selecting Michael Penix, I think that's the big surprise,
Mm-hmm.
fantasy wise, because I think a lot of people were hoping to get him on a dynasty league or something, and maybe for a long term stash is a good deal. But I think that was the big surprise for me. At least was like, okay, they signed Kirk Cousins. The Falcons did to this 4 year, $160 million deal, $80 million of guaranteed money, or whatever, $100 million guaranteed money,
Right.
whatever it was, right? Like a lot of money. So like, it's not like he's on his last year with a player option or something. Like he's locked in for 4 years. Them signing Michael Penix is interesting. Again, like I understand the logic. They're like, hey, we'll have him go behind Kirk Cousins, and understand like what's going on and everything, but or have a backup or whatever. But I think fantasy wise, that was probably the biggest surprise I saw was like a potential dynasty starting quarterback that you could get on a deal because of injury history and other things.
Right.
Now is locked behind a starting quarterback that in Penix probably won't see a lot of playing time for a few years.
Do you think so? I think yeah, it's a 4 year deal, but I think they have outs within like 2 years. So
Okay,
do you
didn't know that.
think?
Okay.
Yeah, do you think Kirk Cousins comes back? So he's coming back from an Achilles tear, and
Mm-hmm.
he was not known as the greatest athlete beforehand. So do you think that potentially hurts him? That um, I don't. I don't understand the move up because I think they could have stayed where they were at and not have to trade it up to get Michael
Mm-hmm.
Penix. But of course, obviously, he was their guy they had circled and said, we're going to go get our guy.
Mm-hmm.
So from that aspect, I don't understand the move of let's trade up just to get our guy when he would have been there early, or later in the draft. But
Mm-hmm.
do you think there was a move that said we're going to try to have the rookie fall under a veteran, learn, and then in a year or two be ready to start? Kind of the model that the Chiefs did with Mahomes when he came out, and trying to follow that path versus just throwing him into, just, hey, see what you can do and good luck.
Yeah, I, I would hope that the Falcons front office was saying what the former, which was like, hey, we want him underneath an experienced quarterback for a couple years. Um, I think it's bad management in general to assume your starter is going to get hurt and have like a replacement for him. But I'm hoping that the Falcons are like, hey, Kirk's going to play for 2 years. Penix has been injury prone. We're keeping him out of getting battered for a couple years. He's going to understand, gain the NFL mindset, develop his traits, personalities, work on his weaknesses, et cetera, et cetera. And then I guess they reevaluate Kirk in 2 years and say, okay, now you're getting close to 40 here, and
Yep.
now like hey, like honestly, Kirk, like great run, see you, guy, and then they've got Penix waiting. It's still a bold move for a team that I think needed to do something different, in my opinion. I don't know. That's just I just thought it was an interesting move. And I'm sure they have their reasons, and there's a reason why these people
Sure.
get paid more money than I do looking at football.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think. I mean, I think the reaction was a lot more negative than the um, what the call was. My only confusion was just, oh, I think Penix would have been there unless that was the guy maybe they were trying to block Denver or Vegas and say we're going to
Mhm.
jump another quarterback needy team and just go get our guy. That way we have him and not have to worry about it later. So I don't know. Time will tell. I'm not personally. I'm not a believer in putting out draft grades right after the draft because we are
Mhm.
just doing our best at guessing what we think players are going to be. So um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I agree.
yeah, that was the biggest first round, at least. The other one that I didn't understand, I didn't think that Carolina's moves made a whole lot of sense either. So jumping up and getting Xavier Leggett at the end of the first
Mhm.
round, where he would have been there in the second round, I think that was again a incorrect move. But again, maybe they're trying to think we need weapons for Bryce Young. We need to keep getting
Yeah,
younger. But again, we can scratch our heads at some of these moves and say, well, I don't agree with that, but time will tell on these picks. So,
yeah, yeah.
but I would say the first almost what 5 picks or so, or most of the first 10 to 15 were kind of chalk as far as we saw the Bears take their hopeful superstar franchise quarterback with Caleb Williams, one overall. No big surprise there. And Washington, while they were potentially trying to ward people off of what they were doing, went and selected Jaden Daniels, which, again, pretty chalk move, what everybody thought was going to do. Drake May goes to New England. And while I like the potential talent, I think I've heard Drake May could have a ceiling similar to what Josh Allen has. What I don't know is
Mhm.
if New England right now is the place that will provide that for him. And while this year may be a struggle, can he get that in future years? But right now, I don't know if there's a structure there in New England. So, um, any kind of thoughts about the first three, the big three quarterbacks on this huge quarterback draft that we had?
Yeah, I think the first three was fairly predictable. I think people were kind of going back and forth on Jaden Daniels or Drake May going 2 or 3. But I would think that based on the team's needs, I was thinking that Arizona was going to get Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yep.
So in Washington and the New England needed quarterbacks, so a lot of draft boards had Marvin Harrison's like 2 or 3, but I was like, it didn't make sense to me. I thought that potentially the Chargers could have drafted a receiver instead of
Mm-hmm.
offensive lineman from Notre Dame, but also at the same time they've got a massive contract and a franchise quarterback in Herbert they got to protect. So totally understand them drafting a offensive lineman higher. But yeah, no real surprises. I think it was. I really like the Bears pick at number 9. Adunze is like going to be, I think, amazing. I think him and Caleb Williams, along with Keenan Allen, is just going to be like that. Bears offense is going to have a whole new look to it next year.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think they're setting up Caleb a lot better than Justin Fields was ever set up. So,
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
unfortunately, for Caleb, the bar isn't too high to start setting records for the Chicago Bears quarterback as far as yards he needs or touchdowns. That he could start breaking those his rookie year, but that bar is not very high. So that's good and bad, I guess.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as you are. Is like I think the bar is low for him, but also Chicago's a pretty big sports town, so they're gonna have high
Yep.
expectations. But honestly, the way that the last few years have gone, really since Double Doink, they need someone to come in and like give them something, and they just haven't been good. Offense has been Justin Fields. We've talked about a few times last year is like has flashes of brilliance, but then would just decide like I'm gonna just freak out and not pay attention to where my coverages are and like not go through my reads properly, and then just like completely break down and have like 2 turnovers on back to back possessions and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
um, like there were moments where Fields like, man, this guy could be great. This could be a fantastic like very much Lamar, but could throw a little better, right? You saw flashes of it, but they
Right.
just never came to fruition. And I think the Bears are like, we can't be doing this for a couple more years.
I say for the Bears, they made the hard choice, and I think I can make an argument that said before the draft, you trade the number 1 overall pick,
Mm-hmm.
and you get another haul. You keep
Mm-hmm.
Fields, and you do exactly what you've been doing now. Accumulate. You're accumulating veterans. You get more weapons, and you make this team better. However, the risk of that is then you pass up on drafting what is potentially another, and I'll use the term, but I think it's been overused, but another generational quarterback in Caleb Williams. And if he actually is that, then as a Chicago Bears, football personnel, you've then allowed somebody else to get that player where you could have
Mm-hmm.
had him. So you're then
Yep.
wrong.
Yep.
You made the wrong choice. So by them taking Williams, even if he's not the generational talent that we think he could be, even if he's just Trevor Lawrence, where Trevor Lawrence hasn't lived up to his hype when he came out, but he's been good. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you made the right call as an organization because what else were you supposed to do? You're supposed to take that guy. That's who you're
Yeah.
supposed to take. So I get
Yeah.
it from an organizational perspective of we'll just move on from Fields. We'll draft our next quarterback. We're moving on. So
Mm-hmm.
so we can mix in. So kind of we'll mix in some more real draft talks as well. But talking about we'll mix in some fantasy here, players here, and so let's talk more wide receivers, and we'll start kind of. I think we start at the top. This to me, from a fantasy perspective wise, and we can get into a dynasty or redraft or a little bit of both. But Marvin Harrison Jr. goes to the Cardinals. Malik Neighbors, he gets drafted by the Giants, who that can be a questionable call if nothing else. And then Roman Duze, as you alluded to, was already with the Bears. So out of those three, is there any particular one you may not like, whether it's for this year or maybe in a long term focus, you don't like it because it's a bit unstable of an environment for them?
Yeah, I think for me, of those three, Neighbors is probably who I'm not as excited about. Keep in mind, though, this time last year we had this exact same podcast, and I was all about Quentin Johnson, and you were like, "Nope, you're wrong." And I was like, "Nope, watch me, watch it," and then I was wrong. So I'll come clean today and say I was wrong, 100% wrong on Quentin Johnson. I thought he was gonna be incredible for the Chargers, and didn't work out. But anyways, back to those three receivers. Yeah, I think Neighbors probably has the worst situation of the three. Does that mean he's going to be a bad fantasy receiver? Not necessarily, but the problem is we have Daniel Jones's body of work, as we've seen,
Yep.
has been very inconsistent with receivers. Um, Even receivers who have been good for a time, or whatever else. So, like, the Giants receivers have not been big. They've been good flexes. They've been like some waiver wire pickups, but there have been people that you wanted to start. I think Marvin Harrison, if Kyler Murray can stay healthy, I think he's going to be fantastic. And then Odunze, I don't. Again, that's one that I'm not quite sure about, just because it's a loaded receiver room and you have a new quarterback. So both of those factors are like, he's going to be inexperienced. He's not going to go through his reads properly. Odunze probably should be, I would think, wide receiver 2 behind Keenan Allen, I would think. Maybe
Well,
not.
you
Maybe
also
I'm
have
wrong. Maybe
DJ Moore, so he's more
and DJ Moore. You're
potentially
right. You're
wide
right.
receiver 3. So, yeah.
Yeah. So that's my thought. Is I think Neighbors is probably in the worst situation. What do you think? Same thing or a little different?
Well, so Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors both step into a number 1 wide receiver role because Arizona moved off of DeAndre Hopkins. They don't have Marquise Brown there anymore. So it is Marvin Harrison, probably Michael Wilson's probably the second wide receiver, and then you have Trey McBride as your tight end. Malik Neighbors steps in because he is the best talent out of Darius Slayton,
Sterling Shepard's still there, right?
Sterling Shepard's still there, Wan'Dale Robinson, a whole bunch of slot receivers where Neighbors is a alpha. He is a true alpha wide receiver. However, his issue will be a wide receiver can only elevate a mediocre at best quarterback so much. If you have a great quarterback with a mediocre wide receiver, that does a lot more for the receiver. So, and then Odunze, like you said, he's kind of buried on the depth chart. Now, I think we have a 31-year-old Keenan Allen, 30-year-old Keenan Allen, where he is. Last year he battled some injuries, a brand new team, and we've seen it before where aging wide receiver traded to a new team, kind of maybe doesn't pick up where he left off. So there might be some opportunity for Odunze. I think that these three as wide receivers themselves, if there was one of these three that came out in a different year, say if Odunze comes out last year instead of this year, we're talking about him as the wide receiver 1 overall last year. So
probably
talent-wise, talent-wise, I think they're going to be fine. I think if you're drafting these, Neighbors would have to temper expectations because of, let's see what Daniels does. Because if Daniel Jones does, because if Jones doesn't do well, and Brian Daboll is probably coaching for his job this year, that situation will change. So there's potential change coming down the road. Harrison probably is set up best with a situation with Kyler Murray, so he's probably a pretty stable situation. And then Dunze has to wait at least probably 1 year before he's taken over more of a starter role. So I think,
and that's what I was kind of referring to is like with the Dunze is like for a redraft league, right? Not really for dynasty, but like for a redraft, it's like, wow, like a Dunze, like 9th overall pick, like I got really hot about it. It's like, well, it might take the Bears half the year to get him into a defined role. And then from a fantasy perspective, even then, it might be where, all right, who knows how he's going to fit into their scheme? Who knows how well Caleb Williams is
Right.
going to do? Right? Like, there's a lot of things. So, I agree with you. I think year 2 or year 3 potentially, Keenan Allen leaves, whatever. I think he's going to be great. But I think you're right. The depth chart is stacked. I mean, they've got 2 very good receivers that have more experience than him, and rightfully so. He should be wide receiver 3 coming in, right? And he might gain Williams' trust more. He might have a connection, but
Yep.
I don't think it's gonna. You don't want to, in my opinion, you're not going to spend high draft capital on him.
Yeah, not in any sort of redraft league.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think redraft, you're definitely taking Marvin Harrison. Now, I think he's steamed up. I've seen him go in some what like best ball is what's being drafted right now, and I think he's going at the end of the first round, maybe in the second round. So it's still pretty high price to pay for any of these,
Mm-hmm.
with a lot of potential of there's some unknowns that we've got working with, but I think
Yeah,
Dynasty, you're taking any of these three, and especially
yeah, for sure.
if it's a single quarterback league, these are probably, in my opinion, the first three off the board, no matter what. Then we can start having conversations of, okay, who's next, based on talent or situation potentially. Um,
Yeah. Do you think, before we move off of the first few rounds, dynasty wise, what do you think about Caleb Williams? Do you see him as a? I mean, you have Marvin Harrison's kind of like a, that he was the hot pick, but for a lot of teams or drafts, sorry, a lot of leagues where the draft is coming up at some point soon.
yeah.
Where do you think Williams ranks in like the top 5 or 6 picks?
Are we talking single quarterback leagues?
Yeah, single quarterback leagues. Yeah, let's
Yeah,
do that.
single quarterback leagues. So I think for single quarterback leagues, for me, it's going to depend kind of on team needs. So if you're a team that, like, we play in a dynasty league where I have Justin Fields and Gardner Minshew as my quarterbacks right now, so
Yeah, yeah.
it's a pretty quarterback needy team. Um, However, I also have the 103, so I'm probably not moving off that to say I'm going to get Williams over a Dunze or Neighbors or whoever falls to that position. But if you're sitting at the 104, 105, maybe it's the 106. I think then you can start having conversations because, I mean, the hot name now, obviously, because he got traded up for, is Xavier Worthy. He landed in the absolute probably best spot long term for him. But again, this year potentially is not going to be as great as we are going to hope it's going to be. I think there's potential. He has definitely a high ceiling, but he's also, again, stepping into a role where he's not the first on the depth chart. And then you got, maybe it's, you like Brock Bowers, but I think you can make the argument because of his landing spot, I'd rather have, especially if I'm a quarterback needy team, I'm going to take Caleb Williams over him. So I
Mm-hmm.
think after the first three, you can definitely have a conversation about what's your team need. And I think if you're drafting Caleb Williams, I think the worst you're probably going to get is maybe top 12 to 15 quarterback or higher. I mean, there's potential for him to be even higher, but I think even if we temper expectations on, all right, let's at least see what he has in the NFL. But you're getting Trevor Lawrence then, maybe. And Trevor Lawrence has been, you know, a consistent starter for fantasy teams that have just done just fine. Um, it may be a reach, maybe a little bit of a reach, but I don't think you're hurting your team. You're not losing your league with that draft pick. How about that? Where you could be
Mm,
losing it
gotcha.
with other draft picks. So if it's a 2 quarterback league, I'd say it's still Williams first overall and move on. But I think
Mm-hmm.
you get to the 104, 105, 106. I think you can start making a case, and I think that is where team specific needs are more going to come into play. So, thoughts? What are your thoughts on? either Williams, but then also, we haven't really touched on it, but Brock Bowers, he falls to the Raiders, and
Mm-hmm.
they drafted Michael Mayer last year as a tight end. So, do you see his draft stock potentially dropping? Is he still going to be potentially the tight end one that he should be in this class?
Man, good question. I was honestly surprised the Raiders went with him. I thought they were going to get a quarterback. Just honestly.
I think they got
So
jumped. I think Atlanta and Denver,
yeah,
I think they jumped them, and I think
and
Vegas
they
looked
couldn't
at the
find a
board.
trade. You think to fall
I
back
think
with good
so.
value? Okay,
Yep, I think
no,
so, and I think it'll be Gardner Minshew this year, and
yeah,
I think they just decided, well, Bowers is the best available, so we're just going to go with best available and move on.
yeah. I think that's kind of what I was thinking. Was like you mentioned, they probably got jumped, but then also too, I think they were hoping Gardner Minshew was going to come in, be the backup, and they were going to draft Michael Penix because they were next, right? They were 9,
Yep.
right, and then Atlanta was 8. So they were thinking Atlanta's not going to go quarterback. They got Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix go to the Raiders, and then they, that's probably what they thought, and then Minshew be the backup, right? Where it's like, hey, rookie struggling, Minshew can play for half a season, a full season, whatever, get used to things, and then we can send Penix out or something. But yeah, the Raiders probably got you by a good point. I think they did get jumped. Brock Bowers. The thing is, like right now, I have a lot of PTSD in fantasy with tight ends because I feel like every time we talk about one, Kyle Pitts, like
Yeah.
is the prime example, right? But like every time we hype up a tight end, we're like, oh my gosh, this guy was fantastic. Like Kyle Pitts at Florida was like Superman. A kid did all this stuff, and he was like 6'6" and all like 250 and all these like crazy things. And then like Atlanta just didn't utilize him. So I'm afraid like now to be fair, like Darren Waller with the Raiders did a great job. He was fantastic
Sure.
for a long time. It was no problem. So again, like I hope that I think he's going to get drafted high because tight end's so needy in fantasy. Like there's like 3 or 4 good tight ends in fantasy right now, and you're going to take a flyer on a potential 5th one being good, which is Brock Bowers, right? You're going to take that versus like a receiver or a running back where there's 10 to 15 good serviceable running backs or receivers before you start dropping off, right? So I feel like
Yeah.
people are going to be way more like willing to spend high draft capital on a rookie tight end than they would like a receiver or running back.
Yeah, my philosophy, especially if I'm building a dynasty, I'm going to avoid tight ends early.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
exactly what you just said. Kyle Pitts, his rookie year comes out, has 1,000 yards. What has he done since? And
yeah,
we can get redraft conversation, because actually that's a separate conversation. I would actually potentially draft at ADP Kyle Pitts, depending on where that falls this year, because the situation's so much better now. But he definitely hasn't lived up to his number one or his first round grade that we had when he came out a few years ago. Last year, it was Dalton Kincaid was the talk of the tight end class. He was supposed to be the one that was supposed to do all this stuff. And while he did great, it was Sam Laporta who came out and now is regarded as one of the top 3 tight ends, and he's one of the youngest ones. I know he
mm-hmm.
tore his ACL late in the year, but he's still regarded, like, if you drafted Sam Laporta later and not Dalton Kincaid, you're a lot happier with what you got. So not taking the
Mm-hmm.
first one. So I think so. Would you then say, I'll throw out 3 other tight ends that are rookies this year, and based on potentially, because these are all either second to fourth round rookie drafts, and some of them actually go undrafted. So instead of Brock Bowers, Ben Sinnott, who got drafted by the Commanders, he actually sits behind
Yep.
Zach Ertz right now. And the last player that sat behind Zach Ertz was Trey McBride, and he's considered a top 10 tight end right now. Um, it was Jatavian Sanders, who got drafted by Carolina. Or I'll throw out one more, Theo Johnson. And he actually sits behind Darren
Mm.
Waller, he was an aging tight end, and he's got potentially, he may or may not be there this year. So those are all players who tested well at the combine, who didn't fall too much relative to what their stock was going to be in the draft. And since they all tested well, very athletic, good production in college, would you take one of those three potentially over Brock Bowers? And if so, do you know it? Where might you lean?
No, I mean you bring a good point, because of those three, I mean, like I definitely Johnson's tough because again, I'm probably just I don't know, I feel like I repeat myself on some things, but like with the Giants, I just
Situation.
don't
It's
love
situation.
the situation that he's in,
Yeah.
right? But I think I have to go Bowers. Like you're right. I mean, you brought it up. Like you know, it like the potential for Bowers to come in, and you look at the quarterback situation. You would think, right? This is maybe us like trying to fantasy, use our fantasy logic to like outsmart ourselves here, but
Right.
you have a quarterback situation, which is probably Gardner Minshew. He's not throwing 50-yard bombs. It's going to be like it's a new team for him, a new offense, new playmakers. He might rely a lot on Bowers to move the ball, pick up 5 yards here, 10 yards here, et cetera, et cetera. This little dump off pass that Laporta has done a great job of in
Yep.
Detroit. So, like, I think I gotta go Bowers in the situation. I have to. I think it just I don't. I mean, like off the rip, like it's the most attractive look. Now, like what you mentioned, like choosing the hottest rookie tight end in a draft, like it could bite you in the butt.
Yeah.
But like the game script and situation is the most favorable of all of them. I think.
Absolutely, especially going for this year. If you want this year production, Bowers has the best opportunity out of everybody. Ben Sinnott, with Washington, Zach Ertz may or may not be able to finish the season. He is kind of up there in age, but again, you're taking a risk on what could happen. So that's more probably a long-term dynasty. Let's see what happens. He was actually, I read a story, he was looked at by Kansas City because he has a lot of halfback tendencies with his game style as well. So again, he's potentially a good blocker and can be used in a versatile way that people talk about Bowers as well. I don't love the landing spot for Jatavian Sanders. But again, I don't love what Carolina's doing, and I don't know exactly if I can trust that. So, again, like we were talking about with the Giants, I don't know if that's a situation where I'm going to necessarily trust that. He may get on the field right away, but do you want to trust that over, Vegas, who outside of Devontae Adams, Gardner Minshew's throwing to who? Jacoby Myers, and that's it. Like, there's obviously, Bowers potentially has the skills to just go on and up and Michael Mayer make him the backup or they're playing 2 tight end sets that Bowers is roaming around the field. So definitely some risk. And like you said, we kind of, as fantasy gamers, have some PTSD of take the hot tight end early and don't worry about it. And, Kincaid last year did fine, but he wasn't the one at the end of the season we all loved. So yeah, we don't know the right answer. We're trying to solve the puzzle for what's going to happen. We can't predict the future. But
Yep.
well, speaking of predicting the future, so fantasy wise, so this is going to be pure fantasy. Landing spot, draft, this year, dynasty, all the thoughts together. Who would you rather take based on ADP? So I'm going to throw out a couple wide receivers for you. Again, we're trying to predict the future here. Would you rather take Xavier Worthy, which we kind of commented a little bit on, drafted by the Chiefs, who landed, he was one of the best spots they could land, or take Lab McConkey, who got drafted by the Chargers? And again, you mentioned earlier, the Chargers let go of Mike Williams, they let go of Keenan Allen. So their number one is Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
So between Worthy and McConkey, who do you like better? And you could frame it up whichever way you want. Say it's redraft,
Sure.
dynasty, whichever way you want. So landing spots. Yeah, who of those two?
Yeah, I think for me, from a fantasy perspective, I probably like McConkey a little better.
Okay.
And the reason why is that, yes, like I understand. I'm not saying Herbert's a better quarterback than Mahomes,
Sure.
but Keenan Allen outproduced every receiver on the Chiefs last year, including Kelsey,
Yep.
which is kind of crazy to think about. So while it's one of those things where it looks like he's clearly the Chargers' number one receiver.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, if both of those guys are coming to me and I can choose between the two, I'm going McConkey, right? I think Worthy, it's tough because the Chiefs, like the last really 5 years, 6 years since Mahomes has been really good, right? It's like the offense is there's so many targets that just because you're a member of the Chiefs, you get drafted higher than you probably should be. Minus Kelsey, right? That's obviously worth his value, but the receivers that we've dealt with other than Tyreek, right? We've played the carousel every year with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, right? Like McKinnon, like all these other receiver or running backs were like, what do we do with these guys? So, anyways, I think that like in fantasy, volume is king, and like that's like the biggest predictor of success for receivers, right? Because like the more volume you get, the higher odds you have of touchdowns, of catches, yards after
Yep.
catch, all of these things. So I think just based upon volume, I would probably go McConkey.
So I like that because I
Mm-hmm.
think this year, especially, McConkey has the definite path to higher volume. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I think the way the Chargers drafted, Jim Harbaugh is known from his days, whether it's in the NFL or what he did in college. Um, I think they're going to be more balanced, if not potentially slightly more heavy run offense, because they also brought in former offensive coordinator from Baltimore, and they also brought in Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, drafted O line, like you said, in the first round. I could see
Mm-hmm.
them wanting to play a lot more physical run style game, but at the same time, with a quarterback like Herbert, who is a much better passer than, say, Lamar Jackson, where that Baltimore is a run first style offense, it's hard to just bottle that
Yeah.
up. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think by getting drafted by the Chargers, McConkey has, the wide receiver one tied to Justin Herbert and could be very good for a long time. So from this year, even Dynasty, McConkey is great. Now, I still would say if I want to draft just pure ceiling upside, I want to draft what could this player become. Xavier Worthy still checks that box for me. If I'm going pure just upside, because he is tied to Mahomes. That being said, you know, we don't know what's going to happen with Rashi Rice this year. He
Mm-hmm.
could face a suspension. He could also face a suspension next year because the legal process takes so long. The NFL has already said we're going to wait for the legal process to play out with him. But even if Rice is suspended for, let's say, half the season this year, Worthy is still sitting behind Marquise Brown, behind Travis Chelsea, behind a few other receivers, where that's not going to get you just a amount of targets. I don't think he's Tyreek Hill. He's not, to me, going to ever compare to Tyreek Hill because Tyreek Hill is a unicorn, but he's also not McCole Hardman either, where he's just a fast guy. I think he
Mm-hmm.
has a lot more talent um, than Hardman did being drafted. I think you and I were talking earlier. This was a while back, and you had noted that Worthy. had trouble with drops in college, and that was one of the red flags on him. And I think that's a fantastic point to bring up because Kansas City struggled with their receivers um, having drops. So I think that's a good thing to note. I did read he had a broken hand 1 year in college. He played with a broken
Mhm.
hand one
Yep.
year, and so I think to me that says potentially there's a reason why, but I still think there's room to be cautious. We kind of have swung as a fantasy community to Worthy land the best spot. We should all be excited. Go get Worthy, where you might look down at the end of the season, McConkey has outscored him, and hey, I'm I'm just happy drafting the guy that everybody seems to have forgotten. So no, I agree with that. So
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. Like they're both good. I just think I like personally McConkey a little better. Personally,
yeah,
that's what I would choose.
absolutely. Nope.
Yeah.
Two good offenses, two good quarterbacks, and also two good wide receivers. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, when you sit and think about it, run it, it makes sense to say I would take McConkey, whether that's a redraft this year or a dynasty where you want to hold on to him for a few years, um, type of thing. So, Brian Thomas Jr., who got drafted by the Jaguars, and he now potentially is one of the leader receivers for Jacksonville. Christian Kirk still there, Evan Ingram still there. Or do you take Keon Coleman, who is with Josh Allen in Buffalo?
Mm, man, that's a good point. Goodness, that's
So
like a little. Yeah, sorry.
I would
Good.
say, I was gonna say both of these players when they comp out, they to me have very volatile profiles from an athletic standpoint. So as I look at these players, they could have a very up, you know, comparison or a very down one. And so to me, I look at a lot of volatility, but also a lot of the same potential situation. Um, and it's again, you want to be tied to Josh Allen, you want to be tied to Trevor Lawrence. Both really good options. Um, yeah, thoughts?
Yeah. So I mean, I think on the situation, I think Coleman probably is a better situation. I mean, at him at Florida State, I thought he did great, and I thought that overall, like he played their X receiver real
Yep,
well. And I think Josh Allen was pumped. He texted him and said, "Hey, you're the guy that I want," and all this stuff, right? So I mean,
yep,
obviously, gonna hype up his guy, right? He's not gonna not hype him up, but
right.
um, I think that he is probably in a better situation we talked about, and I know that situation isn't everything, but Jacksonville has struggled with having a standout wide receiver one fantasy wise that has been really good and worth the
Yep,
draft. Like it's just been inconsistent. Um, and even in their playoff year, they had 2 years ago, right when they beat the Chargers.
yep,
They still like it's all over the board. Like Christian Kirk would have a great game, and then like score 2 points the next game, sort of thing. And I feel like Josh Allen, like he's going to always throw volume. They're going to get first downs with his legs. He just overall a more consistent and more offensive. He just drives a bigger offensive engine than Trevor Lawrence does. So
right.
more first downs, more volume. I think back to my volume preaching I'm doing, but I kind of like him overall a little better in Buffalo.
So while we can't predict volume, but it's fun to like. I totally agree. Where if we look at this, we look at Diggs leaves, so we have the vacated targets from Diggs, and while all of those may not go to Keon Coleman, there's at least a fair amount of those that probably will. So and to get targets as a wide receiver, you have to be good, you have to be talented, and if Keon Coleman's that talented where he's able to get those targets, then it's overall, I think, a better situation because it's Keon Coleman leading the way. You have Khalil Shakir, and then what? Dalton Kincaid, and then James
Mm-hmm.
Cook running out of the backfield. So the target competition is a lot less. I think if I'm looking at this year, I'd bank on potentially Keon Coleman doing a lot more um, this year. And again, that could be also true for Dynasty. The nice thing with Coleman specifically, I think Brian Thomas goes kind of more middle of the pack first round. Um, in single quarterback leagues, he's probably going in the early second rounds, I think, in superflex leagues. But in single quarterback leagues, Keon Coleman goes at the end of the first round. So what you're telling me is on my dynasty teams, I've had a very good team because I'm drafting at the end of the first round or close to that. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
still able to get a wide receiver that is potentially the number one target for Josh Allen. That proves to be, potentially very successful as a building perspective for my dynasty team. So I love the spot. I love where he's being drafted, and that you can get somebody that so late. I think it's kind of a gem for teams that are already good to still acquire new talent and in good situations as well. So, I got three here for you. Kind of thoughts on these three. We're gonna switch. Two of these receivers went in the first round, and they both were labeled as a little bit of reaches by each team. One receiver fell, but he fell to the spot where he's playing with his college quarterback now. And so Ricky Pearsall, who again was from Florida, drafted by the 49ers. We have Xavier Leggett. I'm blanking on his college team right now, but he was drafted by Carolina. Or Troy Franklin out of Oregon, who gets paired up with his quarterback Bo Nix in Denver.
Mm. Man, I I liked Troy Franklin. I was actually kind of surprised that he fell where he did. I thought he was going to get drafted a little sooner. Um, I liked him at Oregon. I saw one of the games in person, and he caught a couple of really good balls, and he's a really good yards after catch guy.
Yep.
Um, I mean, overall, like I wish the Chiefs would have gotten him in a later round. What I was hoping was we had this whole Rashi Rice situation, and
Right.
then the Chiefs wouldn't have burned their first round pick on a receiver, and then would have picked up Troy Franklin like in the second or third round, which was like my goal. Like that was what I'd
Sure.
love to have happened, but the Chiefs had to move up because of the Rice situation. Um, so yeah, Xavier Leggett. With him, I think he played for South Carolina,
Oh, yep.
and
That's right.
yeah, and so for him being with the, I think this pick by the Panthers was management giving in to the coaches. I say giving in; it's a harsh word. Management listening to coaches, and the coaches saying, "Hey, we got Bryce Young. We trade all this capital to Chicago to get Bryce Young. Like we need more weapons. We need." I need to see that you guys want this to work rather than just like let's just throw out this rookie again and like let's draft a first round receiver. Right. I think that's my thought is that they were trying to give him a weapon. The Carolina situation, I don't think gets much better. Not because Bryce Young isn't good. He has flashes of it, right? But situationally, like the defense is not good. Bryce Young is running for his life. He has to make some crazy plays on the run. A rookie receiver and a second year quarterback, like that's a lot to ask with a bad defense. Because like with a good defense, like you can lean on those to kind of like help balance your team out. When your offense is constantly having to throw the ball, you're playing from behind, it puts a lot of pressure on young players to perform. And I don't love the situation.
Yeah, I don't love the draft pick simply because they didn't have to trade up to go get him. And that's where, why are you trading up to go get a player that will be there later?
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to trade up, at least take a player, in my opinion, that, you know, you should take there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I don't know. Was it management saying this is the guy we want? Was it the coaches saying give us a guy, this is who we like? Um, this is a very confusing pick. I think out of all of these, again, I think there are some wide receivers that have some very volatile player comps where they could be very good. They also could be very poor, and I think landing spot is going to kind of determine what they are. But Troy Franklin actually, he has a lot of good traits, a lot of good qualities. Um, Denver already moved away from Jerry Judy. They gave him to Cleveland, so he's already gone. You have Marvin Mims there as the second year wide receiver who showed a lot of flashes but couldn't stay on the field, whether that was coaching or whatever that was. But he has some promise. And then Cortland Sutton had a big touchdown run, but he's not been that good as far as consistent of a wide receiver in his play at Denver. Also, I could see Sean Payton wanting to move off of him sooner than later, which then, if Nix is starting out with Denver, Franklin potentially, because this is Sean Payton's guy, has a potential
Mm-hmm.
better path to say, I'm going to be viable.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Denver may not be very good as a team this year, but you can still get fancy protection from not good teams who see it all the time. So I think Franklin has the better upside with the situation currently than both Pearsall or Leggett. We didn't even touch on Pearsall yet, but he is still stuck behind Debo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. Yeah, we've heard trade rumors out of San Francisco that one of those might be traded away, and if you take Pearsall in the first round, you're banking on San Francisco saying we're going to move off of one other wide receiver, and then saying because of that, Pearsall is going to be great. And I just, I don't know if I can say that yet. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
I buy that.
Hmm. Yeah, good point. Good point.
I think we saw some teams reach for wide receivers, especially at the end of the first
Mm-hmm.
round, and
Yeah,
there were
I
so
mean,
many
which
other
makes
players.
sense. Yeah, and I think part of that is like I mentioned before. I think GMs are listening to coaches, and the coaches are like, I need like our offense is bad, or we need replacements. Like I want to splash, and like there's a reason why you have, like the Cowboys, for example, last 5 or 6 years, um, in terms of their run game and their running back's been great because they've got a great offensive line. The
Right.
Eagles and all these other examples of like these teams that have these great offensive lines, the 49ers a while back and everything. So I think what that happened this draft is I think a lot of managers, and I'm not sure this got influenced by coaches or just the overall, the narratives, right? But I thought there's a lot more FOMO of like we have to do something to fix something, right? And like on
Right.
defense, it's like, oh, like if I get a good defensive back, okay, great. Like they can shut down a receiver, right? Obviously influence a quarterback, but like a receiver who's electric, who can make a play, is going to overall, from an eye perspective, do more for the team. And so, again, this is me talking from like a fan, a fantasy person. Like, I don't know how much merit there is to that, but I definitely think like there seemed to be a lot of desperation. Like, we got to get this person in the late first round from like a receiver or something that didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, and we saw teams move up or stay put and then just draft their guy or their wide receiver or whatever. But then you take the flip side where a team like Buffalo, yeah, we'll let Kansas City trade up. We're going to take a pick and then plus another pick later on. And oh yeah, Carolina, you want this pick now? Yeah, we'll let you come and we'll take a few more picks. Where Buffalo still addressed their need at wide receiver with Keon Coleman and drafted him without reaching, but then also built draft at picks for later on. That to me is the way to say, yeah, go do it that way and know what you're going to get. Don't just have a player circled and say at all costs we have to get this player. And I think we had some of that going on of, oh, we need to get this player at all cost, and it just wasn't happening. So
Mm-hmm.
I, I think we could have seen a team like Arizona trade out of number 4 if they really wanted to, but I don't think they wanted to move back far enough to say we don't want to draft one of those top 3 wide receivers. Um, so it's, I would say, we can speculate all we want to on this side of this side of every draft and say, well, why did they do this? And who knows
Mm-hmm.
why they all did that. So QB situation. So we don't really need to touch on. We kind of talked about Caleb Williams. He has a pretty good situation. Jaden Daniels. I mean, we can kind of talk about him with the Commanders. He has a pretty decent situation with. He's got Terry McLaurin there. Jahan Dawson's there. New coaching staff. He's going to run. Cliff Kingsbury as his offensive coordinator. So potentially a pretty decent situation with Jaden Daniels. Um, who do you like better quarterback wise? JJ McCarthy going to the Vikings or Drake May being drafted by the Patriots?
Gosh, I think I like McCarthy. Honestly, I
Yeah.
mean he's just got better skill players, right? Obviously, so I mean it's. And I think JJ McCarthy was all over the draft boards. I mean, started out right after all the college stuff was like late first round, got up to like as high as 4 or 5. I saw. I think Mel Kiper had him at 5 one time, and then fell back down to the Vikings. I think the Vikings got a great pickup. And do I think he's gonna? I think he's gonna be, you know, probably somewhere in like what Wentz, the non MVP season Carson Wentz range was, right? It's kind of what I'm thinking he's going to be, which is fine, right? Like Vikings can figure it out, and he's got skill players around him that are going to help bail him out and make him better and kind of help some of his situations, right? So, but yeah, I liked him way better. I think the Patriots right now, like they're a mess.
Yeah.
The team's a mess. It's like the Panthers. Honestly, like there's so many aspects to fix that like it's gonna take multiple drafts, multiple seasons, or like random people that are on their bench or on their roster to like start and take over and become stars. Like there's a lot to work on those teams, and I don't think Drake May. I think he's like Bryce Young, honestly. Like he's got talent. He's going to come into a situation. Like I don't know how well he's going to do because he's going to get. I mean, their offensive line is not good. Um, yeah, I don't know. I just don't see things going well for him. But
The offensive line isn't that great. The 2 best receivers are also rookies with Jalen Polk and then Javon Baker. Um, Drake May, I've heard, has a ceiling of Josh Allen, and again, I don't like that's taking what his physical attributes are, where this is what he could be. I'm not going to say he's Josh Allen by any means, but because I think you're right, I think the Patriots, the pertinent thing would have been, yeah, let's trade out of 3 because I don't want to draft a quarterback at this team right now. I'll take Jacoby Brissett and let him run the team for a year. And, next year's quarterback class, right now doesn't look anywhere near as good as this one. But if you're not ready for a quarterback, what are you doing to a player that could have that talent? Um, it's malpractice, I think, to say, oh, we're just going to take the guy because he's going to be better than what we had next year, what we could have had next year, even though we're not ready for this guy to come in and play. Um,
mm,
and I get that, not every college quarterback's ready to play, but with the way the NFL now turns, of if a rookie quarterback we just saw with Justin Fields, you got 4 years, and if you haven't produced, all right, we're moving on. So we're going to draft a quarterback not ready with a good situation. And in 4 years, if he doesn't have a good situation, all right, see ya. You weren't it, obviously. So therefore, we're gonna go give it to somebody else. And I think
mm,
it's a wasted pick. I think they could have done it different. But again, it's easy for me to say
mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah, I agree.
So we've talked about quarterbacks a bit. real quick, before we get off quarterbacks, do you like Bo Nix from a dynasty perspective? Because a redraft perspective, it's not going to happen unless Kirk Cousins is not playing this year, which is probably not going to happen. But dynasty perspective, do you think Bo Nix or Michael Penix actually is going to have a better dynasty career long term for?
Ooh,
That one
long
I'm going
term.
to.
Well, both.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, this one, it's going to be specific to dynasty. Long term, who do you think better?
That's a good question. I mean, Nix is going to have 2 years of starting experience, you would assume,
Yep.
before Penix does. They're both older. I don't know. That's a great question. I mean, their styles. I think they're both really good quarterbacks. They're some of my favorite quarterbacks, and in college the last few years to watch. And I watched both those Oregon Washington games last year, and they're fantastic.
Yep.
I would, golly, if I had to pick one, I think I like Penix better, probably long term, like 7 or 8 years. I think
Sure.
his upside's higher. I think Bo Nix is probably the safer floor play for fantasy. But I think Penix probably has more upside, but also too he could be injured. So like I think it's kind of like a risk reward situation.
It's a risk reward, I think, because Bo Nix, while he's going to be starting earlier, they're kind of rebuilding on the fly in Denver. Sean Payton's trying to take Denver and make it to what he wants, and he has done well with teams in the past. But then at the same time, with Penix, you're, like you said, potentially 2 years waiting, and he's got Drake May, they've got Kyle Pitts, they've got Bijan Robinson. Like, they have pieces there, but you have to wait for it. So if you're a team that can wait on quarterback for a few years and you want to, I think exactly what you said. I think there's upside there where the floor might be Knicks for now, but the upside potentially is there with Penix over in Atlanta. So this running back class, not really touted as a major big upside running back class. Do you agree with that narrative, or do you think it's something different?
That's probably true. I mean, you don't have the like last year, like Bijan, right, going in the Falcons. It was like, oh my gosh, like fantasy was like 101 was Bijan. Everything else didn't matter. It didn't matter what it was. Like it was Bijan all the way.
Right.
This year, there's a little more parity. I don't feel like it's as strong. I mean, in a redraft league, I really don't think you have a lot of first round or even a lot of second round picks. Honestly, coming out of this group, like you're going with your. There's a few, right? But like I feel like in other drafts I've had, there's been like 2 or 3 that like, oh my gosh, like this is like Bijan being a first round pick. Like he was and I think he got drafted like I think he was like late first, early second in most leagues. And in our league we played, I got him late because everybody was afraid of him. Yeah, I mean, usually there's like 2 or 3 like first round picks, and I feel like this year there's just a little more parity. It's more like people kind of refilling positions, filling wide receiver 2 spots that they need, or it's like you're drafting a quarterback that's not really going to start, or they're in a bad situation. Like there isn't like this. I feel like there isn't like this immaculate situation where Caleb Williams is probably the best quarterback. I think they've got the best situation where it's like, hey, you've got all this talent, and then like I think the Texans are probably one of the scariest probably one of the best fantasy teams.
Right.
This next year, they've got a lot of playmakers. I think CJ Stroud, if he played the same as he did last year, it's gonna be incredible. But like there wasn't a lot of like action where it's like, oh my gosh, like there's a run, like obviously Stephon Diggs with the Texans now, but there wasn't like a lot of this like, oh the Texans drafted a receiver or a running back or whatever it was in the first round, and therefore like this exploded right into like potential fantasy value. So I agree with you. I don't think it was a good solid year. I think we're going to see a lot of the fruit of this draft class in probably like 2025 or 2026. I don't really see a lot of like immediate pre-hype have to have these players right now type of guys. I think obviously, as we know, there will be plenty of people that we're gonna like not draft until fifth, sixth round, and they're gonna become like wide receiver 2 for the year, right? That's how it always works.
Sure.
Yeah.
So would this year's running back draft class look a lot different if, let's say, Jonathan Brooks didn't tear his ACL late in the season? Would this running back class potentially be looked at as better because Brooks may have been viewed a little bit differently without the injury?
I mean, maybe, but I think what's happening is like, and you saw here, like Jonathan Brooks does get drafted later, but like you look at the top, like the first round, like I don't think there was any. Was there any running
No
backs
running
drafted
backs.
first round?
Nope, not in the NFL draft. No running backs in the first round. I think Brooks was a second round pick. That
Yeah,
could
I
have
think
been
so. I think
a
so.
third round pick.
Yeah.
I think part of that
Yeah.
is the way that the NFL is changing now. That position is valued a little bit less, where you see more
Yeah.
value coming in the third, fourth, maybe fifth round running backs, and you're not necessarily taking a first round running back. Now, again, last year we had Bijan and Gibbs as our, hey, these are our guys that in the NFL draft we're getting, and then from a fantasy perspective, like these are the clear top guys that we want. And they Bijan kind of had a disappointing year, but so did everybody on the Falcons last year. So that's kind of a, all right, that situation has changed now, so therefore it could only get better. Um, I think potentially, and tell me if I'm wrong though, I think potentially there are two running backs later in redraft, but for Dynasty 2, that you might be able to get back half the season production this year, and maybe want. And one of those is Jonathan Brooks. I think I'm going to say back half of the year because he is coming off an ACL injury. Carolina's got Chuba Hubbard there. They've got Miles Sanders there still. That's not a really scary path to starting, but I think he comes back, he gets eased in. He could take over that role back half of the year and potentially do pretty well. The other one is Trey Benson, and he went to Arizona, and right now he's backing up James Conner. James Conner, fun fact, has not ever played a full season. He's always been injured at some point during the season. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not
Good point.
betting on injury, and I never wish an injury on a player. I'm just going by what historically has happened. So I think those are the two that potentially could have value both now and potentially then later. And these are also considered more quote unquote top of the draft class this year.
Yeah, I think I like your point about Trey Benson. It's a good point with James Conner. You're right. Like that's he hasn't really played a full season, and the way that, like you mentioned before, how teams and just GMs treat running backs, it makes it really hard to pick running. It makes it. I think it's been really hard in fantasy the last 5 years to pick running backs. So like have functional like players that you're like, oh, like Zeke Elliott with the Cowboys in 2016, easy money, right? You just like you were good to go. You knew what to do. Maybe not 16, like 18, but you know what I'm saying? Like it was like
Whichever,
this is great. This is like this is super great and perfect. And now it's like you're having to do a lot more research on backups. But yeah, back to your point on Trey Benson. I think I like him as a stash. I think he's gonna go under the radar because he's a backup. I like him a lot. Just because I think that offense, like, again, situationally, like you got a running quarterback, which obviously takes a little bit of it away, but at the same time, they're making first downs, like they're running the ball. I think it's going to be good.
Yeah, and I like I said, I think those are two that we could see. And I think from a fantasy perspective, we've had to shift from, we're not drafting running backs who are workhorses. That's a thing of the past. We're drafting running backs who are you play with multiple running backs from an NFL perspective, and you know that if I draft a running back, he probably has somebody taking part of his load just because that's the style of play we have now. I'm gonna throw one other name out. I mean, I could throw more, but I think there's one other name that could potentially be kind of a stash, and is Blake Corum. So he was Michigan's running back.
Mm-hmm.
He went to the Rams. Now, I understand why uh not Keaton Mitchell, he was Ravens. I forget who the running back was that came out of nowhere last year as I think it was a rookie that played for them. Oh, that doesn't bug me. Hold on a sec. Kyron Williams. Why could I not remember that name? Last year, Kyron Williams, he was a top producer for fantasy purposes, right? So we all fell in love with him. And this year, he is either first or second round pick in fantasy. I could see Blake Corum stepping into and take more of his role, that we see more of a split backfield with that with the Rams this coming year. But part of why I see that is Kyron Williams last year. If you look at statistically, he was one of the worst blockers when it came to quarterback protection. He actually rated as one of the worst in the league. Blake Corum in college, and I understand college is different than the NFL, but Blake Corum in college was one of the best blockers for their team for quarterback blockers. So I think the skill sets go a little different, where Corum could win out eventually over Williams. I don't know. That's my lean. Champagne or not Champagne. Coach for the Rams. He'll move off of players. McVay,
Yeah.
thank you. Names are not working with me tonight, apparently.
You're fine. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. McVay's already shown us he'll take a running back that did something the previous year, and he'll just turn them aside and go with the new guy already. He's done that already. So that's another one that I think potentially could happen. So I don't know. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, McVay is a wild card. I mean, like Puka becoming like basically wide receiver 1A with that offense was no one expected that.
Right.
So I mean, McVay is like he's hard to trust. I mean, it's like him and Bengals coach.
Oh, Zach Will or Zach.
Zach
Oh, it's Zach something.
Zach something. Zach not Wilson. It's Zach.
Zach
Anyways,
Taylor.
so the
Zach
Bengals
Taylor.
coach Zach Taylor. Thank you. So the Bengals coach is the same thing, right? Where it's like it's in like the injury reports and like who's playing what, and I feel like both of these guys play their cards really close to the chest on this stuff, and
Yep.
yeah, it's really hard to trust Rams players honestly in McVay's offense that are like not starting receivers or quarterbacks. Honestly, like their whole receiver mess the last 2 years with. Yeah, like you mentioned, Kyron Williams and everything else, a complete mess, right? Like, oh, he's rookie, he's talented, he's always injured. Okay, great. Well, he comes back, and then like, I don't know. It just was like, if you're a Kyron Williams owner, you want to like shoot yourself. You know, it was so miserable.
Now's the time to sell because Kyron Williams
I
stock
think
is just
so.
going to
Yeah.
go down. So if you've got Kyron Williams, great. That was a fantastic run from last year. You enjoyed it. Get out now. Because also, I mean, I bring up the quarterback blocking just because Matthew Stafford's not young, and he got hurt last year. And if they want Stafford to stay healthy to try to do something this year, they have to have the players on the field they're going to protect. If Blake Corum is the player that protects a lot better, then Kyron Williams, that's going to earn playing time in a coach's mind. They're going to see that. So that's where I think, you
Mm-hmm.
could see a guy like Corum step in, especially close to the back half of the season, and take more of a role. So
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of running backs this year that most of them are backups, and their path to starting is based on injury or overtaking. Do you have any particular one that you could see um, potentially stepping out outside of who we've talked already?
I think we covered. I'm trying to think on brain. I don't know. I think we kind of covered everybody that I was thinking of. Again, like we talked about, I don't think it was a. I feel like it wasn't a huge star loaded. I don't know. I mean, there were star people, but or star rookies. I just feel like there
Sure.
hasn't been a lot of. I mean, we covered the receivers. I think we covered pretty much everybody. I feel like we needed to cover. We
So I'm
did
gonna
a good
ask
job of that.
one more running back here, and
Yeah.
then we're gonna get out of here on this one and this is staying in your area, so we're gonna stay in LA
Mm.
area, but we're gonna switch teams to the Chargers. So we kind of discussed a little bit of the Chargers where potentially they may be a little bit more run heavy team. They brought in Gus Edwards, they brought in J.K. Dobbins, they let
Eckler go.
yep, they let Eckler go. So, but then they drafted also Kamani Vidal, and he was somebody that was coming on as the draft was happening. He was kind of coming on as a more of a, whether it was just from a fantasy perspective, the fantasy community liked him. But he was the running back because Blake Corum was linked to the Chargers because of the tie with Jim Harbaugh. He doesn't go with him. He goes with Vidal. I think potentially because the path I don't think is that great. J.K. Dobbins has been hurt with some major injuries, and this year being Achilles, we've seen how that kind of zaps players. So he's not the running back that we should think he was coming out of college. Gus Edwards was a fine running back, is nothing special. So the path to stardom or at least a starting role for Vidal is similar to maybe like a Corum, where
Mm.
the incumbent is not this.
Yeah.
He's not trying to overtake Bijan, right? Or
Yeah. Exactly.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Derrick Henry back in the day in his prime or
right,
something. Yeah.
right. So thoughts potentially on
Mm.
Vidal with the Chargers and a new potential look offense with under Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah. I mean, that's one concern with the Chargers is that Greg Roman offenses are very run heavy and don't utilize a lot of different pass schemes. But I think the X factor is Herbert, right? Of like how
Right.
well he can throw the ball, and Greg Roman has had like Baker Mayfield and other you know quarterbacks that have not had like the skill set of Herbert, so that's gonna be interesting. But yeah, definitely more run heavy. What was kind of weird though was like they signed a lot of the receivers are completely new, right? So they
Yep.
obviously McConkey was a second round pick. Then they signed Brendan Rice, I think, which is
Yep. Jerry Rice's son.
Jerry Rice's son from USC, yeah.
Yep.
And then they also got the Cornelius Johnson from
Yep.
Michigan, who's
Yep.
also a seventh round pick. And they also, I think, signed DJ Chark. So they like have
Yep.
a bunch of kind of a completely new look receiver room, which I think lends itself to running backs taking over.
Yep.
So I think I kind of agree with you. Like I think he's got potential. I think that there's a lot of room there to prove himself and to perform well fantasy wise because there's gonna be a lot
Sure.
of rookie receivers and Greg Roman loves to run the ball, and if Eckler had been in here with Greg Roman and been involved with everything, and
Yep.
who knows? Who knows what would have happened? But
Right. Well, and Roman in his days with Baltimore, he didn't lean solely on one running back. They used multiple different
yeah,
backs. So that again path to success or path to starting, Vidal could overtake one of the two, and then all of a sudden he's potentially leading the back by week 6 and then getting expelled by Gus Edwards or J.K. Dobbins. So, yeah,
Yes. Yep.
it'll be interesting. So, well, Grant, this was fun. This was great. Good.
Yeah.
Love the draft reaction time with you here.
Yeah. No,
Any
it's good. Good conversations, and yeah, really, it was a good time.
any final thoughts as we end tonight here?
Man, I'm just ready to get going. I'm ready to get going with football, and we've got 4 months or so until the season starts, and yeah, looking forward to it. It's gonna be fantastic. So I'm excited.
Yep. Excited. Next week we've got schedules dropping. I think I saw May 15th for schedules being dropped. So a
Yes,
lot
I
of
think
exciting
so. We
stuff.
can go. Yeah, we can go through this. It'd be fun to go through the schedules. We can go through that, and yeah, look at the Chiefs' schedules and other big matchups.
Yep. Yep. So, but anyway, well, for tonight we will say farewell to the stream, but it was fun, and we'll be back in everyone's ears at another time.